Hello and welcome back to another episode. I'm Stefan and this is Japan at War. A few episodes back, we talked about the king of Korea, Sanjo's retreat north. He had almost given up everything and fled to China, but actually decided not to when around 3,000 Ming troops met him in Kwaksan on July 26, where they then accompanied him to the town of Yuzhou near the Yalu River. Ming General Zu Chengxun had recently had a quite fair bit of success against the Ordos Mongols in the still ongoing Ordos campaign in China. When he had met with the king, he assured both the Korean king and his government that the Japanese problem would soon be taken care of. He is even said to have thanked the heavens that they were, still in Pyongyang and were for him to take care of personally. The Koreans, who had by this time had experienced what the Japanese were really capable of, cautioned him to not take the Japanese so lightly. He thought nothing of it and brushed aside all of their concerns. Meanwhile, back in Pyongyang, Konishi's men were still waiting for the reinforcements to be brought through the Taedong River. Days had gone by with no word of what was actually happening. Konishi then sent a request to Seoul to send reinforcements. Supreme Commander Ukita Hidei sent very few. It was his duty still to hold the capital until Toyotomi Hideyoshi arrived to take over, and he just honestly couldn't spare the men. At the same time that the token reinforcements walked through the gates of Pyongyang, Konishi Yukinaga got word that Ming soldiers had entered into Korea. Zu Chengxun joined up with attacking commander Shi Ru and led their forces south to Pyongyang. They arrived outside the north wall of the city on August 23rd, absolutely drenched in the pouring rain just before sunup. Both the darkness and rain had completely masked their approach and had caught the Japanese off guard. Zu realized he had the element of surprise and ordered his men to charge and take the undefended Chilsongmyeon, or 7 Stars Gate, and he actually managed to get his men inside the city before the Japanese could gather their weapons and mount a proper defense. Konishi's men started to take casualties, but after the initial shock wore off, they started to realize that the Ming force was actually much smaller than they had thought. The Japanese decided to fall back and spread out amongst Pyongyang's streets. The Ming were, encouraged by this and made the mistake of splitting up and then pursued the Japanese troops down the streets. With the Ming soldiers taking the bait, the Japanese soldiers then turned and opened fire with their matchlock guns. The Ashiguru and their samurai leaders then rushed forward to attack the now fleeing Ming soldiers. The Chinese, realizing that they were outnumbered and taking increasing casualties from the matchlock fire, retreated towards the Chilsongmyeon. Konishi's men were waiting to punish the Ming and followed them, cutting down any soldier that fell behind as they charged. When they chased them out of the city, some of the unfortunate Ming soldiers found themselves wading through huge pools of mud that had formed from the rainstorm. The Japanese quickly cut these men down, while their comrades rushed where the Ming leaders were. They actually managed to kill Shi Ru in their charge, but General Zu Chengxun managed to escape them on horseback. He and the men that had managed to escape kept up a hard pace, fearing that the Japanese might, pursue them to finish the job. They didn't stop until they got all the way back to Yuzhou. They rested there for 2 days. The general actually downplayed the defeat to the king and his government, saying that this was a mere tactical withdrawal that he was forced to do due to the constant rain and the mud, and to not worry as he would soon return from China with more men, and that this was only a minor setback. His men, while this was going on, were forced to camp out in the open where it was still raining. They were understandably angry and blamed their commander for their quite embarrassing defeat. After his 2 days' rest, Zu Chengxun returned to Liaodong in China, where he wrote a report to Beijing, apparently blaming the Koreans for his defeat at Pyongyang. He claimed that their lack of support was what had cost him victory. The Japanese back in Pyongyang sent a message to the Koreans after the battle, saying that the Ming assault had been like a herd of sheep attacking a great tiger. Privately, though, this attack bothered them quite a bit. They had pretty easily beaten the Ming, but they knew that the Chinese would be back and in greater numbers. Not only that, but they didn't seem like they would be getting any reinforcements after all. Meanwhile, on September 6th, a Korean righteous army under the command of Jo Hyun teamed up with a group led by a warrior monk, Yang Yu, and managed to recapture the city of Cheongju by lighting several torches and having several flags lifted up to trick the small Japanese army into thinking that they actually faced a much larger force. They retreated later the same day. A few weeks later, the two would attack Gyeongsan on the 22nd. They would both die in the failed attack. On September 12th, Kunishi Yukinaga went south to Seoul for a meeting with Supreme Commander Ukeda Hidei and his military advisors Ashita Mitsunari, Otani Yoshitsugu, and Mashita Nagamori. Kuroda Nagamasa and Kobayakawa Takakage were also in attendance. Kuroda Nagamasa proposed that they should build fortifications between Seoul and Pyongyang and focus their defense around the capital of Seoul. Now, this would allow them to have a fighting retreat should they ever actually need to, and allow any reinforcements the time to actually make their way to Seoul. It was actually a very intelligent plan, but unfortunately for them, they didn't go with this strategy. Konishi Yukinaga, who was charged with the defense of Pyongyang, argued that this was, it was just them accepting defeat, and would not go along with any plan that involved them giving up land. So, nothing came from these meetings. Afterwards, Kuroda Nagamasa and Kobayakawa Takakage moved their armies to the surrounding areas around Pyongyang. Kuroda would occupy Hwanghae province and Kobayakawa would move from northern Chola province to Kaesong in the following month. The Japanese did indeed actually have a cause for concern. The defeat of the Ming army at this battle woke China up to the fact that the Japanese army would need to be taken very seriously. The Koreans had been right all along. Hideyoshi's army was an actual real threat. On October 6, 1592, the Wanli Emperor of China sent an imperial edict to King Sanjo that they would send over 100,000 soldiers soon to Korea, and that they now needed to coordinate their attacks, and that the countries of Siam, the Ryukyu Islands, and other nations to raise hundreds of thousands of soldiers to invade Japan, and Hideyoshi would be forced to submit to death. Like I've said before, this war has been described by many historians as the Asian World War. And it's an incredibly accurate description to what this war actually was. But we'll talk more about that in future episodes. In the comments section down below, tell me what strategy you would come up with if you were currently in the Japanese position. I look forward to reading and replying to your comments. See you next time.